Hey, it's Chris Fleming. Welcome back to April's edition, 2017, of Spirit Talk. Our guest this month is an ordained national spiritualist teacher. He's a certified medium and commissioned healer with the National Spiritualist Association of Churches. He has studied many things paranormal since his teens, and in 2000, with his wife Lisa, assumed leadership of the Association TransCommunication. He has conducted a number of formal studies intended to establish the objectivity of instrumental transcommunication, and with his wife authored the introductory book for ITC, There Is No Death and There Are No Dead. With a Bachelor of Science degree in Electronics Engineering, he has served as a strategic planner, design and project engineer in the communications industry, as well as in the paranormal community. Please welcome to the show, Tom Butler. Welcome, Tom.
Thanks, Chris. Boy, you have no idea how old that makes me feel.
Oh, come on now. You've got a great track record, and I've been following your work for many years. We met back in 2003, 2004, and I've always respected the dedication that both you and Lisa have put forth over the years to the science and the understanding of what you call the trans-survival hypothesis. And what people don't realize is, when you have a passion for this, when you have a love for this, it eats up a lot of your time and a lot of your life. And it's because that you've come across something that is so extraordinary, that is life-changing. It's scientific, and yet there's scrutiny, there's skepticism, and all the sweat equity that you put into this, there's not a lot of money to be made from this, because it's a point of contributing to this world, contributing to the science, and helping people understand that we do survive death. There's no such thing as death, only the physical body. But also that what can we learn from the trans-survival hypothesis that will give us a better life, but also heal those that are bereaving and that are suffering from having lost a loved one. And I know both you and Lisa have contributed so much to that, as well as other researchers, in having people connect with loved ones. So because of that, go ahead.
So I was going to say, in many respects, we're just reporters. But before I go on, I want to observe that we see a lot of people come and go in this field. And when we first met you years ago, we had no way of knowing other than the fact that you were really dedicated to what you're doing at the time. And it's very pleasing to us to see that you're still working the way you are in this field. We need a lot of people who are willing to stand up and express their thoughts about this. There's too many people observing and not enough people in the field like you are. So that's very helpful.
Well, no, thank you. The thing is...
What I wanted to...
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, I've always had this statement, believing is one thing, knowing is another. And when we took a little word of belief is not always based on facts. Sometimes it's just assumptions, opinions, or faith. And when I say the word knowing is when you have done this over and over again, the data speaks for itself. And when you add the personal experiences that collaborate with the data and the collective experiences, it no longer becomes a belief. It becomes an experience. It becomes a knowingness. And I think that's why it's not anything that I'll ever turn my back on, because it's who I am and it's who you are.
And it shows with you. The thing that was interesting to me, as an engineer, I'm pretty hardcore objective, and also practical in the sense that an engineer is a scientist with a shovel instead of a calculator. And I think that what we've discovered over the years of leading the Association TransCommunication is that this is really ultimately all about people and the personal, not just experiences. Yes, it's good for helping people understand their own survival, get away from the fear of death a little bit, but also understand that their loved ones are just fine on the other side, and they will be too when their turn comes. But it's also, what we're discovering is that all of this information about transcommunication and what's being learned in the both the mainstream psychology and the sciences, and also by parapsychology about psychic functioning, is that we have a lot more control over who we are and our own personal development than we really realize. And so I talk a lot more and more about mindfulness and realizing that what you do now matters now and forever, but also you have control over what you do now.
That's a great point. You know, when you and I first met, God, that was 10 years ago or so, even more.
Yeah.
I'm a lot different person I am today. Back then, I was still molding who I was, my personality. You know, I had ego issues here and there because of my lack of understanding or stubbornness, being a Taurus. And you know, when you dive into this research, you learn a lot from the other side, but you also learn a lot not just of the spirit world, consciousness, but you begin to learn more about yourself.
Yeah, I look at it. I'm kind of a student of the ancient wisdoms, and I look at three really important revelations over time. One of them we think of as the Hermetic wisdoms, coming from Hermes back about 6,000 to 8,000 years ago in Egypt. And then we think of Buddha in the more modern times, and certainly Jesus. But if you strip away all the religious, we've cloaked all of these revelations with religious trappings, which are more of a social need. But if you look at the fundamental messages, all three pretty much are saying the same. And I'm kind of the mind now that the mediumship, the EVP, the various forms of transcommunication we have today, the awakening awareness of our relationship with the other side is kind of a modern day revelation. And if we look at it in terms of the implications of that to who we are, rather than, where can I go look for a ghost?
Right.
Then we begin to find out that this is really, it's all about a way of life, of which understanding the other side is an important part.
Exactly. You know, it's funny. I talked to a friend of mine who's known me since 2000, 2001, and he was very skeptical of stuff, and he had a few experiences with me, and he's come to the realization that, I'm just not just a crackhead, someone that just is just, having these experiences and just talking about it. He realizes that there's something to it. But you stated, like ghost hunters is, I said to him, I don't like that term anymore, because ghost hunters, the term is so associated with entertainment, so associated with the thrill.
It's a hobby.
It's a hobby. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I don't need to say anymore. It's a hobby. And when you classify that term, there isn't much research data and everything, that's been cataloged in journals and this and that by ghost hunting,
Yeah. And I don't think there's really supposed to be.
Right.
We've known a number of people who have taken the next step and turned their hobby of ghost hunting into a serious study of the other side. And from them, there has come some worthwhile results that we've tried to get them on the website as we can find them. Pro or con, we have one there that was first published in a Skeptical magazine. But it's good research, and you've got to take the research the way it comes. But the thing about the hobby, the social interest, we had a lot of members of the association kind of go away in favor of Facebook and the social relationships of the hobbyists, the ghost clubs in town.
Right.
And I think that that's a natural evolution, but what it reminded me of is that there's really very few people who are seriously trying to understand this. I always look in parapsychology, and when I read their articles and everything, I say, well, where is the theory? Where is the so what? This is all about people, so where is the so what? What do I take away from this research that I can use? And every once in a while we see that. So I think that the most important thing for any of us to do is become educated rather than take for granted. When somebody says, I'm a parapsychologist, I'm studying paranormal, they're not necessarily trying to help you learn about paranormal. Probably at least a third, if not a half, of the parapsychologists in the world don't believe in survival. They're actually, some of them are actively trying to prove that this is all in our imagination.
Right. And that's the one thing is I've, over the years, people get to know you by certain things. And they don't truly know you. My whole life having experiences growing up in a haunted house, with ESP, Sixth Sense, communicating with ghosts, it goes on. People don't really know that part about me, that I've been interested in this since I was 4 years old. And that's going back, of course, to 1970, 71. The thing is when we talk about like ghost hunting shows and everything, is they do introduce some interesting technology, forms of ITC. But then where does it go from there? The one thing that I began to realize, and I was very fortunate when I did the first show that I did, working with you, Lloyd Aubuck, some of the other people, I had not been aligned next to somebody that was dedicating their life to researching. Even though I always knew this stuff existed, I had followed it and done things my whole life pertaining to it. That alignment made me realize that there's something deeper to this than just ghost hunting. And I realized, what is it? What can I do to contribute? What I began to realize was that my time in front of a camera, I take my experience, my background, and I figure out the intent of what I'm doing for that particular project and what that intent can be to contribute, whether it is the direct response method with electromagnetic detectors, whether it's the spirit box with DRVP and dealing with ITC and EVPs, and then educating whatever I can, dealing with children that have psychic abilities, counseling the family and the children and how this works and how you recognize these messages and these signs and become comfortable with it. So everything there had to be a purpose. There is always an evolution within our life that we have where we grow and we develop. Some of us may become stagnant and we never get anywhere. And the point is that some people get googly-eyed or see stars when they realize they're going to be on TV, and they forget about that there's really a reason for it behind it if you choose to go down that path and turn that into something that you can contribute to others. But sometimes people don't know what that contribution would be. With what you guys have always done, you have established in the community a organization, a structure. Not everybody has followed it. Not everybody has paid attention to it because there's so many distractions like social media and other things within this world. The question is, where do we go from here? And that is a question I've been pondering for the past year or two. And I know in my own path and destiny that I've been taking notes, looking back in the research of some of the greatest inventors in our time of science, of Tesla, Edison, Marconi, and looking at some of the greatest researchers in ITC, practitioners such as Marcello Bacci and the Spiricom and the priests that were doing EVPs back in the 1950s, taking a look at them and Jurgensen and whatnot, and realizing, what have they done that we're missing today? What is it that we're missing? Because we're kind of stagnant. Now, we have these apps coming out. We have other forms of technology. And some of these apps are, when you look at them, there's too many false positives because they're pre-programmed. Yeah. They're pre-programmed. And don't get me wrong, there is some legitimate, organic ITC coming through. But then how do you truly know unless you dismantle that entire thing and you look at what's pre-programmed? It's difficult. So with that in mind, and I wasn't going to get to this question later, but I think maybe we start with that and then we back up and go through some more information. Tom, where do you think we should go in ITC now?
Well, the thing that the lessons we've learned so far, I think you probably know, I spent a lot of time on Wikipedia as an editor trying to bring balance to it. Well, it started out with me trying to help them rewrite the EVP article. I'm banned from editing the EVP article.
Jesus.
I'm banned for life from editing the Rupert Sheldrake article. And just generally, wherever I go, I can draw a crowd of skeptics in about 3 posts or edits, and there they are. But what I've found, every time they come back at me, they say, well, you guys have no theories. that are workable theories that make this understandable, that explains how this might work. And if you look around, for instance, in parapsychology, they'll talk all day about psychic functioning. They call it PSI or psi, and they propose the super psi hypothesis. And basically, what that says is that when we die, the only thing left of us is the memory, residual energy in the atmosphere that psychics can somehow access. That we really do die. And when they say, and the alternative theory on that is this a survival hypothesis, and that's it. They don't explain it. They don't say why it doesn't work. On and on like that. So basically, what I tried to do, based on what we've learned so far, is incorporate ITC into the super psi hypothesis, if you will, and I call it the trans survival hypothesis. But what I'm seeing is that if you take a model like that, and I don't know if that's the right model, it works for me, but it can certainly be evolved. If you take a model like that and begin to get agreement to say, okay, we are all agreeing that right now that's a pretty good model, let's work with that. Just like the scientists in the mainstream, they work with the Big Bang theory. They all, okay, let's start there and then go from there. Well, if we begin with a common understanding and then we begin to develop it, if you say that we survive, what are the implications of that? Let's follow those implications. And when you begin to do that in a fairly methodic fashion, then progress can be made because there's real understanding to be had. And I feel like that's the next step, is that we've got some blind alleys in front of us. One of them is this quantum physics stuff. But there's a fellow named James Carpenter. I think he was past president of the Parapsychological Association. He's a working psychologist in one part of psychology. And he put together a book, a theory, a first sight theory. Well, basically what that says is that everything in reality produces a psi signal, psychic signal, and we sense those signals. We pay attention to some, we ignore some. And he has basically a rule set for a machine, an algorithm machine that'll say, these are the circumstances where you turn away from or turn toward, and on like that. He's really thought this out based on meta-analysis of hundreds of studies. Well, if you take that information and begin to apply that to a model, and then you take somebody like a Rupert Sheldrake, who has really come up his morphic fields, you've heard of it, it's hypothesis of formative causation, I think is the proper title for it. And you started, okay, reference points like this that have a lot of foundation to them, a lot of really smart people developing them, and you work those into a model, and I'll say yes, as I have done, but others can do this too, then you say, okay, with this model, what are the implications? If this is true, then there has to be consequences. What are those consequences? And follow that. Then you begin to, like I say, have real progress. And I think that's where we are right now. We have some of the building blocks in place, and that's what we need to do is get some of our folk away from Facebook. And, like I just proposed a new study on Sidereal Time and EVP, and I've got 5 people signed up for it. I haven't gotten any results yet, but it's simply asking people to log what the Sidereal star time is when they take their recording, and they get an EVP, and also to use a few people to help them verify that it's really an EVP, it's witness panel.
Right.
And so I'm looking for results on that. If we could have just more participation, you can't do these studies without practitioners.
Right.
So it's just, we're actually backsliding as far as the community goes. We're becoming, let's see, if you look back, excuse me, if you look back at 59 when we were supposed to have presumably studied or discovered EVP, and when Sarah Estep started the association, AAEVP, we had a lot of people doing a lot of work in this field, and I can't find too many of them today. I feel like it's dissipating. One of the problems is we can't do research with things that have a lot of false positives.
Right.
Yes, things like EVP Maker and Radio Sweep, those things potentially, like Margaret Downey uses the Radio Sweep device, but she has a little thing that has a knob on it that she can turn that knob in about less than a second. She can sweep the dial. And I actually had Frank Sumpton send me a message one time and said, you can't do Radio Sweep that way. It won't work. But actually what happens is that she's producing what turns out to be really good noise for transform EVP. And by transform, I mean voices formed in noise, right, as opposed to bits and pieces put together in a string.
Right.
And so that noise is actually producing very good voice. So what we're finding is that if we can get people to look at where they're, there are some good examples of EVP out there. If they look at where they're actually getting that, is it in the radio sweep as pieces of broadcast music, or is it actually just a noise generated by the sweep? And because most of the ones I've heard that really actually sound like they're EVP are actually in the noise rather than opportunistic pieces of sound. But if we can just get more people to examine what they're doing and then start formalizing their work a little bit, we could get back to studying this.
Kind of like creating a system is everybody's just all over the place and there's no foundation, like you said earlier.
Yeah, it's just a tool for the hobby.
That's kind of why, I picked up your book 2 weeks ago, Your Immortal Self. And I started reading it, and and at first when I looked at it, it was kind of overwhelming at first with all these terms because I hadn't been using these terms. But I realized, well, if I'm going to start, creating this method like you said, and using specific terms, there are terms that I do use and have been using for the last 10, 15 years. But I realized that there are other terms that you've created or has been passed down from other researchers that I realized for this science to continue, we need to be on the same page. We need to be using these terms. So I bought your book, Your Immortal Self. I downloaded it from Amazon and I put it on my Kindle. And I started reading this to become familiar with these terms and start making some of these terms in my vocabulary. Can you talk to the listeners right now a little bit about your book, Immortal Self?
Well, I think it was 1993 I wrote the Handbook of Metaphysics. And my objective back then was to give people a structure of this is what the paranormal is thought to be, and what these are the concepts, so that when they ran into a new concept, they would have this foundation of understanding, so they could better understand the new concept. And I've always felt that if you don't, again, it's that theory. If you don't have some kind of foundation concept or theory, then you're just kind of shooting in the dark. Well, the work that came out of transcommunication, I've personally answered thousands of emails of people coming to the website asking questions about various forms of phenomena, a lot of them grief-related, a lot of them fear-related. Like, for instance, if I start recording EVP, am I going to bring a demon home to my mother?
Right.
That kind of thing. Well, so you can't just give them a pat answer. You have to understand what you're saying, because there's implications of what you say. And so, the ethics are really important here. So when I put all this information together, all this background, and the fundamental acceptance of the fact that we survive, and then I spent a lot of time trying to entice parapsychologists into helping us, working with us. Lisa and I, we reached out a lot for them. We even wanted to sponsor an Island kind of conference in survival. Mm-hmm. We wanted to sponsor one that we're going to totally fund, bring in a few scientists and help build a roadmap for how we would study these survival phenomena in order to be able to be in agreement with the parapsychology. Well, today I'm realizing that I just wrote an essay, an open letter to paranormalists, basically saying that watch out for parapsychologists. They're not our friend. And so, I finally had to make the step, say, look, we're some people who actually accept the idea of survival are on their own. So I wrote this book with the intention of being able to say, okay, these are your alternative theories. This is the survival theory. This is how it makes sense, and I gave a lot of evidence mostly from transcommunication. And then I said, okay, this is the community that you have to develop your understanding in. These are the good guys. These are the bad guys. These are, like that. And then I spent the rest of the time in the books, section 3 is on transcommunication, saying basically these are the phenomena, this is everything we know about the phenomena of EVP and ITC, visual ITC. And this is how it makes sense in terms of this model that we talked about in the first chapter or the first section. So the book is really, I know it's a beast. It took me forever to write. I got so tired of editing it. It's going to take me forever to pay off the copy editor on it. It's not selling well. People are afraid of it. People are reading a little bit and say, oh, Jesus.
Well, let me just say this. I'm going to stop you right there because when I looked at it and I saw how many pages it was, I said this out loud. I said, Tom, are you kidding me? I'm like, this is like an Encyclopedia Britannica. And I'm like, I'm never going to get through this. And I said, you know what? Pieces. And so I downloaded it, and you have it broken up really well into the different chapters. And I started reading it, and I realized, wow, this is fascinating. There's some terms that I might struggle with, but then you explain what that term is, and I'm like, you know what? This is education, just like anything else. People need to be educated, and you've spent such a long time with some of the top people all over the world that this is a great handbook for people that are serious about ITC.
If you think you have to do the work to learn it and do it, that's a good place to start. I've imagined it as a textbook for people to teach with it as well.
Yes.
That'll take time. But that's the whole thing. It's a long game for me. And look at it as a legacy piece. My objective right now, I'm 73, coming up on 74, I guess.
Wow.
And my objective now is to make sure that all the lessons learned don't just disappear with us.
Right.
We like to travel, and we travel together, and one of these days we might not come back. So.
Right. No, that's the thing.
You have to be realistic about it.
Yeah. And that's the thing, like I was saying earlier, is, okay, what can I contribute? The last few years have been other personal struggles and medical struggles. It's like now it's like, I want to contribute more to this world, to this field. Not everybody gets that belief or that intent within them. Yeah. And what you've done is you've contributed, and you might not know exactly what form it's going to contribute or to whom. And sometimes it takes years before that comes into effect, and maybe even decades. You don't know. But the thing is, you've done that. And I recently watched Calling Earth, the documentary that both you and Lisa were on. And
yes, he did a good job on that.
It was fantastic. And I sent it to some of my other colleagues, 4 of them, actually. They've all watched it, and they thought it was fantastic, because not too many people know about this. So anybody listening, dig up the documentary called Calling Earth. And I had watched it on Vimeo, and there's a couple different versions of it. But both you and Lisa had stated something very important in that documentary, dealing with the skepticism and the hypothesis that was stated of the super psi energy and survival hypothesis, that some people believe that, when we die, it's just our past memories that are here. Well, that can be disproven, that it's not just that. Well, we do know that memories do remain. We know that with place memory and stuff that I've experienced, and that all our thoughts and memories are projected into the atmosphere, into the environment, electromagnetic field. But to take that a step further, and I believe Lisa stated this on the documentary, is that we know EVP is real because when we look at conscious energy and the survival hypothesis, it's not just replace old memory because it's responding directly back to us. It's calling us by our name. It's answering our questions. The only thing that can do that is a present-day form consciousness that is intelligent and able to respond. Past memories cannot have a dialect with you back and forth.
Okay, the answer, and this, I agree with you 100%. And obviously, especially our forced cell experiments we've done for the big circle, which, by the way, that's coming alive again.
Oh, good.
The loved ones communicating, like Martha Copeland's daughter, Kathy, she actually named the circle. And Kathy, the one I like is that Martha was praying for help for her, I think it was her grandfather was going in for an operation, and Martha was, at least back then, of the habit of always recording, looking for comments from the other side. And there's this EVP of Kathy saying big circle right in the middle of her prayer.
Wow.
And the point is that they're not just simply there, but they're helping us.
Right.
Whenever, as they can. I mean, there's self-determination. We have to get out of our own messes. But the thing I think that what we run into is in parapsychology, there's one group, of course, that's just trying to prove that it's all in our head. There's another group that's saying that no, in super psi, if somebody in the world knows the information, then a psychic can access that information magically, by the way, and because of non-locality of the field, and they then would put together what the person would logically say, and then they would themselves cause the EVP to form saying that. So the only way that you could really say, okay, absolutely, survival exists, this person is a sentient being talking to me via EVP, is that if the person that's doing the talking knows something that nobody in the world knows, period. And I have one example of that, and that's Kathy's dog. Martha Copeland inherited Kathy's dog.
Yeah.
And again, of the habit of running as a voice-activated DR60s that she used, Panasonic. And she was cleaning house, and she had it on the table, and somebody called up and said, let's go shopping. She said, sure, and left. Forgot to put the dog away. Recorder's still on, and you hear the dog making a mess in the house, and then you hear Kathy saying, yelling at the dog, Deeja's the dog's name, saying, Deeja, no. Very, very scolding. And you always know it's her voice. So anyway, nobody in the world knew that was going on. So when the only way that could be explained with a super psi hypothesis is if Martha got home, saw the mess, and did something like, well, I know that Kathy would have scolded him if she was here and then caused that EVP, but she'd have to cause it retroactively. And all of our studies are showing that this business of all time is now with them. In parapsychology, they're saying that the psi field, that there is no time. Everything we can see is there processes time. There is time, but there are potentials, and that what we do see, we see potentials psychically. And that's one of the reasons why a psychic will make a prophecy and it won't necessarily come true. It's because of potentials, there are multiple potentials, and some of them come true and some of them don't. Or ultimately, one of them does. So, basically, unless you want to invoke the no time clause in super psi hypothesis, that at least is one piece of proof that we survived conscious, in a conscious state. Else, I just don't think we can prove it, other than dying and finding out. To the satisfaction.
Yeah, what? Talking about, the future. I have all this stuff going in my head with what you're saying. Where we've asked through the spirit box or EVP, how many fingers am I holding up? And they'll say 2. but that could be other people in the room that are projecting that because they're looking at it and they know it's 2. They say it, and that's projected into the room. So we know we can project into EVP and DRVP as well. But I take a look
at Go ahead.
No,
I was going to say, if James Carpenter is right, then we are all psychic. Basically, the model I have in the beginning of the book about a life field and how we process perception and expression. If that model is based on James Carpenter, right. If that model is right, then we interact in a day-to-day state with our world exactly the same way that a psychic interacts with psychic information and a medium interacts with a loved one on the other side. The process, the dynamics are all of those are the same. So what's different is the intention, and we assign objectivity, or say when we get information about the table in front of us, our brain, our mental process perceives that as physical because we have been taught to see that as physical, else it's just another psychic image.
Right.
So anyway, it does come down to, it could be a person in the other room, like you were saying.
What's interesting is, I've had some changes in my life this year, and something hit me with the way some of our politics is going in our disruptive military within other countries. And I'm going to go back. 1978, when I used to do the Ouija board a lot with my mom, and I used to do the Ouija board, which, is a form of communication. And back then, besides doing the reel-to-reel and EVP at that time, the one thing that I did with other people was the Ouija board, because our house was haunted and we wanted to know who was there. Well, there was times that I did the Ouija board on my own, or I did it with a friend that would come over, and I would ask specific questions because I had concerns or I had interests. And I remember specifically a question I asked. There was 2 questions, and it didn't come to light until recently in the last month because it's coming true. And it kind of startled me. And back in 1978, I had asked a question about my future, and many times they were completely wrong from what really happened. But in some instances, they've been 100% accurate. I asked about, World War. I asked about certain things, and I asked, where will I be in the future? And it asked me what year, and I said, I don't know. And basically, the year 2017 came up based on another question I had asked. And I said, well, where will I be in 2017? It says you'll be in Europe. I said, Europe, and I laughed. And now remember, this is a 10-year-old kid, kind of going, that's 1978 and 2017. It seems like it's science fiction because it's in the future. And they said, you're going to be in Europe. And I said, why would I ever be Europe? I barely even leave where I'm at, right? And it says, I said, well, what are they doing in Europe? It says, you'll be working in Europe when these events come to pass. Well, I'm going to be working in Europe. I'm doing a new project, a new show that'll be filming on UK TV, and I leave the end of May. And I'll be spending basically 10 to 12 weeks in Europe this summer and fall working.
And the Ouija board basically made a prediction on that
in 1978.
Yeah, that's pretty neat.
How do you explain that as just memory, place memory?
Well, it sure doesn't work on memory. It also, using the super psi hypothesis, they would go back to the idea that there's no time in the psi field, and so a good psychic would be able to see the future as well as the past, and again, what I'm seeing myself, it's still what the model that works best. Let me put it this way: I don't know. Some of these prophecies are really pretty impressive. Well, like this one you're talking about, but in the model, just trying to stay in the model, the probability, the potential future is really the only way we can see the future. So what I would try to argue, and I don't sound like I'm going to be able to do it very well, is that you had a number of potential futures, one of which would be that you would move to Europe.
Understood.
Really long shot, but it doesn't. There's no logic in that at all. So,
and I understand the alternates, and I've had conscious experiences in the last 3-4 years regarding alternates of ourselves, that we are living other lives, finishing out other things we didn't accomplish, or going down different paths that have popped into our head, similar to some of the quantum physics principles. When the double slit experiment, where just before it goes, all these electrons pop up, and the particle has to select one electron to decide whether it's going to be a wave or a particle. So what happens to all those other electrons when they disappear? Well, the hypothesis, the theory is that they get acted out somewhere else in another dimension.
Yeah, the multiverse theories.
Yes, the multiverse theories. I've come to, based on those theories and my experiences, what I've experienced consciously, accept that principle and to realize, holy cow, that completely makes sense. Because if we were to look at and have a belief in a creator that is going to have experiences, multiple experiences, and have individual experiences through us, for it to be completely complete and to know all and experience all. Therefore, any thought that pops into our head of possibilities, why can they not be played out in alternate realms, as if it continues to branch off until that void is no longer a void, and that cube of experience is completely filled up. And that just tells you that should there be a all-knowing consciousness and creator, which I believe there is, that it would fulfill that. And that opens up to many explanations of what we determine as supernatural and paranormal, that a lot of those things can be experienced in there. But still, what happens to that remaining consciousness, those remaining souls, that they all merge back together with the creator, and that it can communicate amongst one another intelligently? And what about all those forms or those fragments of yourself that when they cease to exist physically, where do they go? Do they unite with themselves, or do some of them remain as another form of individuality until it is eventually reunited with its completeness? That means that that form is not just a memory left behind. It still has interactive intelligence, which means that we're communicating with it. And
I think that I was going to say that, other than the fact that obviously you've really given this a lot of thought, which, a lot of people haven't gotten that coherent about it. I think that what we have to do is the multiverse concept, what you're talking about. You actually just went through a couple of different alternatives about how the evolution of let's call it a soul, how the evolution of personality can evolve, in purpose back to source. What you have to do, your experience. You said you've come to accept that. What we as researchers have to do is say, okay, that's a well-formed theory or hypothesis. What are the implications? And we certainly can't say no. What we have to say is that let's see how that plays out with other things. And for you, you've already done that some and have decided that it plays out really well with the other things and you've experienced. Mm-hmm. And not a lot of people can approach these concepts from an experience level like you do. And so, but I find myself, and the older you get, the quicker you are to say hell no. It's just one of those things. And also, there's founder's syndrome. Okay, so now that's my theory, and I'm going to stick with it. But you can't do that. You have to say, okay, this is one model, and that's another model, and let's see how they play out. There's probably a bit of each that work together. But the only way you can do that is you start experimenting. And when you do an experiment and you analyze the results, then the bad thing is when you don't include the various the known models as part of your analysis.
Understood.
And that's what my beef is with parapsychology, is that the anomalistic psychology people simply won't. They refuse to include either psi or survival in their analysis, and the super psi people simply won't include transcommunication in their analysis. But we have to. You and I, and the others that aren't in that mess, have to include all the theories, including it's an illusion theory.
And the one thing I've noticed, some other researchers out there and people that really, some of them tend to be more into fame, and I'm not going to name any names, but I've noticed over the last couple of years, a couple individuals, one in particular, even though gaining a lot of incredible responses, and some of them I believe a lot are false positives, doesn't look at the old models and the old methods, but instead takes from those and tries to make it their own. And in doing that, and then refutes other models or puts down other researchers, put the attention to their model, which they try to pass off as original, when all it really is terms are changed, a couple things are manipulated, and it's the same principle that's been done by other researchers for the last 80 years. So that's not a progression of the field. The one thing is you have the foundation that's been laid down by some of these great and brilliant minds going back to Tesla and Marconi. And you have Marcello Bacci and Jurgensen and Sarah Eastep. And it's like, hey, listen, the foundation's already been set. Let's take that foundation and go further with it, but don't change the terms. There might be new terms that come up. Like, for example, I have a question for you. As we know with EVP for the listeners, and when we're talking about ITC, we're talking about instrumental transcommunication. Various devices and technology that is receiving messages from what we believe is conscious energy and the survival hypothesis that there is intelligence after death.
Yeah.
The most well-known from TV and everything is electronic voice phenomenon. The lesser known, because it hasn't been properly identified or used terminology-wise on TV, is with the spirit boxes and the ghost boxes and Frank Sumptions and Marcello Bacci, is DRVP. Can you discuss that term before I propose a question? What is DRVP?
Well, the closest we came to that earlier on was, Bacci, of course, but also Annabella Cardoso with her time stream. And there's been a few other efforts. There was a little bit of that with the harsh fish box. Basically, what it boils down to is you've got a radio and it's turned on, and they start communicating across the airwaves to you. The thing is that we have a hard time again with this false positive problem, and I've done some research on radio sweep in its simpler forms, just because I know some of the new boxes now are getting really elaborate. But I've done some research. We sponsored a study done by a fellow with Ryan, and then we've done some ourselves, online listening and stuff. And the false positive level is so high with radio sweep that we finally just had to say, okay, it probably does not produce EVP as such, as it's designed. It does occasionally produce EVP inadvertently because of the noise it generates. So the direct radio, to what I've been able to see, are just more sophisticated versions of the original, like the Radio Shack hack and some of Sumptom's boxes.
Right.
So I can't speak to DRV.
Direct radio voice phenomenon.
Yeah, I can't speak to that any more than what I've done to the radio sweep part of it, because I haven't seen any research on it, and I haven't done any research on the new boxes. We worked with the Paranormal Puck, which was a predecessor to the Ovilus. We worked with a couple of the hacks, and we've studied, like the EVP maker. We spent $10,000 on a study about EVP maker, and finally gave up on it.
Yeah,
It
was
just simply
fragmented.
said that
It was fragmented.
it's the false positives are so high. We also did a study on how people hear things, and it was a Phantom Voice study, and we said there are no voices in these recordings, and people were reporting voices in them. So all of these different techniques, you have to look at the person, the way we hear things, and you have to manage that before you manage the technology. That's why listening panels, blinded listening panels, you're asking somebody, look, I have a recording here. What do you hear? Without giving them any hints. That
the problem with that too, though, is that
you've got to go through that.
And the problem we run into with that too, though, is we can record real people's voices. Put them in another room and record outside the room, so that it sounds a little distant or a little muffled or whatever.
Sure.
And it's not an EVP. It's not ghosts or anything like that. But yet we'll take that recording as an example and we'll present it to a panel. And some people say, oh, well, that's fake. It's not real. And even one skeptic will say, well, I don't hear anything. You don't hear anything. Does everybody else in the room hear this? And everybody raises their hand and we show them the analysis on the computer. And there's the wavelength of like, dude, get your ears checked. But it's just that frame of mind, like, oh, I don't hear anything. Okay. It's the stubbornness. And here's the problem is you'll have the listening panel, even though we know exactly what that person said, because then we have a recorder that's in that room that will play for them afterward that specifically states everybody will hear something different, even though we have the original human voice recording. And when you play it for them, they all realize, wow, I was wrong. So sometimes the listening panel doesn't work.
But Chris, look at it this way: we've got 1 billion or so people telling us that we don't survive.
Right, you're right.
The average, the majority of people simply don't believe it. We're outliers, and so we think that we do survive and everything. The penalty for being wrong is really actually quite high. A class EVP using the transfer method is probably 1 in 1,000. You actually, the average person gets a lot of EVP, but most of it you just can't make it out. It's just class C.
Right.
The fact that we know how people process information, we don't actually know what we hear until it goes through our perceptive processes and it's modified by worldview.
Right.
That's just a simple fact of our physiology. So when we get an EVP and we say, okay, this is Uncle John talking, if we don't have extenuating circumstances, like he just answered a direct question and I recognize his voice and stuff like that, then while it may be paranormal, it may be Uncle John, the prudent thing to do is to set it aside and go on for a better recording. I know it's not satisfaction. I know people that say absolutely everything they record because it's disrespectful to the entities not to.
That's me.
And I said, can you pronounce albatross?
Right. Well, no,
anyway,
but Tom,
I understand what you're saying.
I know what you're saying, and the problem that I've run into, having done this for over 20 years, 20 plus years, where I've sat down and analyzed it through a computer system. When I was a little kid and I got it on the reel-to-reel recorders back in '77. I mean, they were a lot clearer than we are getting today in some of the digital stuff. But there also is that, like you said, the processing of the brain, of what you're going through, the emotions, how that can affect your analysis of what you believe is being said. Because I have recorded, I don't even know, thousands upon thousands, maybe even 100,000, who knows how much audio hours, but it doesn't matter. But what matters is it's enough. And it's enough to realize that today I may listen to some EVPs and some that are not perfect A EVPs, they're in the B or C category. I'll write down what they say. Later today or tomorrow, I'll listen to it again, and to me, the interpretation is completely different.
Yeah, I've learned that the hard way a number of times. But our association actually finally blew up. The discussion board just basically fizzled down to nothing because of a phrase that sticks in my brain is that one person complaining about another person, she can hear the entire Gettysburg Address in 3 seconds of EVP. And then they'll fight to the death. Both of them will fight to the death over what's in that EVP, and all it is noise.
But here's the thing. Here's the thing I want to say to that is that we know that humanity sometimes wants to be proven right. Okay.
Yeah.
And that's another thing. But our lack of understanding consciousness, frequency, and information, we have to realize that we are limited in realizing the possibilities, because I'll give you a perfect example. We can compress information and file into megabytes, gigabytes, whatever, that years ago it would fill up an entire computer or drives or tons of computers. What I'm saying is information that's being broadcast through the ether, being broadcast through the waves, frequencies, radio, even through conscious thought. 1 second, 3 seconds could contain so much information if we knew how to access it. It could be completely compressed in there that it tells us an entire life story. But yet our capacity of processing information is not up to speed as the consciousness that allows that to happen. And here's why I state this. I've been studying near-death experiences for over 20, 25 years. I've met these people personally, Betty Eady, Melvin Morris, all these people, on and on and on. I've had my own out-of-body experiences. And I know that being in this spiritual realm and on the other side, based on my personal experiences and based on my studies, is that you can ask a question. That question is answered before you finish the question, as well as not only is the question answered, but every observation, angle, purpose, reasoning for that question is answered simultaneously, to where you now have a lifetime of experience in 1 second from that answer, which is total consciousness, which means that time is not horizontal, that there's no such thing as time. There's no restriction to time.
And our mental processes have to turn that into a thought.
So how do we know that, that there wasn't ego being played here, or that frequency or what that woman heard activated something in her consciousness that allowed her to hear the Gettysburg Address? Maybe in a past life she was there, and that activated something in her soul DNA that allowed her to hear it. We don't know.
Well, we don't, Chris, but you've got ground rules. We're in the physical,
right,
and we like EVP. The rule is that it's something that people can hear. I agree with you 100%, especially this, the idea of, like Robert Monroe referred to as a thought ball. It contains a heck of a lot more than what we can actually digest. And you're right, it could very well trigger something in her consciousness. But the nature of EVP, what we've defined as EVP and we practice with, is that other people can experience it. And it's an artificial limitation, but then the physical is really an artificial. There's a lot of people think, and my model I feel like it points at that as well, that the physical is an agreed on illusion.
Yeah, it's hallucination. It's a made up game simulation that we're experiencing for a period of time.
Yeah, and it works really well that way. And one of the rules of that simulation is that we can all hear the same EVP. It's just a rule.
Yeah. You're absolutely right. You're right. The next question I have for you is in my analysis over the years, and I recognize this a lot when I was doing Dead Famous recording, but I didn't pay too much attention to it. But I came across some interesting things recently in some further studies that I did. And is there a term or classification or method for an EVP that when you record a response and you get a direct response, a couple words, but then you reverse that response and you get another message that is either saying the same thing but it's presented differently, or it says a completely different message, as if that EVP has two encodings in it, one forward and one backward, that no matter what you play them back in reverse, it has a direct message. Is there a term for that in EVP?
Well, other than just reverse, the idea of reverse EVP, yeah, and this isn't the same as the David Oates
correct
reverse voice.
Right. We're talking about stuff from the other side. I mean, I started calling it a multi-message EVP, which means there's a multi-message in there. There's a message forward and there's a message backward.
There's even been some people who said that it's not EVP and this is played backwards. What I've experienced, reverse EVP was really popular when we assumed leadership of the AAEVP back then, and it's kind of died away. I actually only have one example on the website, and that's from Sarah Estep. And otherwise, we kind of discourage people from looking at the reverse side, because what we've learned is that they will speak where they know we're listening. This is communication. Mm-hmm. They can speak. They'll speak in the refrigerator sound if you work on it. If they think that you're hearing there, when they say that, when somebody will say, well, okay, it has to be ultrasonic or it has to be subsonic. No, because by the time that you upscale that or downscale it to where you can hear it physically, that's where they're speaking to you. Mm-hmm. So, and in my opinion, I guess one of the things that may be inherently lazy, but I think that it's just more practical to focus on forward EVP and the Class B, Class C. Sometimes I'll go after a Class C, but like I got a really good one making a snide remark about Boston Rob one time when I was with him on a video shoot. And unfortunately, it was Class C, and while it made me happy, it wasn't something I could play for him, I'm afraid. So I don't know. What do you do with things like that?
Right.
So I guess it comes down to as my engineering training is, I'm very pragmatic, and I've found that that's just not a lot of fun when it comes to people that are, like a lot of our members, that it's more fun being in a hunting investigation or something.
Yeah, so, I guess it's establishing the communication. A question I've always wondered is, who actually created or coined the term instrumental transcommunication? Where'd that come from?
Well, first of all, going back to EVP, they were referred to as Rodave voices.
Okay, Rodave voices, yeah.
And of course, he's the one that wrote Breakthrough. But Smythe, the publisher of Breakthrough, one of his people, I forget the name of it now, one of his people changed the name to EVP so it'd be more general, so everybody would be able to relate to it better.
Wow.
So that's where electronic voice came from. And then Ernst Sinkowski, a really excellent researcher, and he Mark Macy has worlditc.org.
Right. I know Mark, yeah.
He has a Sinkowski book there, and it's a good read. But he coined instrumental transcommunication in relationship to the Harsh-Fishbach flap of phenomena, and it's become trans now. I've used trans as the prefix, the trans prefix, as simply meaning across the veil. So I use transcommunication in general for mediumship, EVP, ITC, and the proper terminology would be visual and audio ITC. But because EVP came first, EVP is audio ITC.
Right.
And then we have visual. Like my next project for Phenomena will probably be more video ITC, video loop. I like that.
Yeah, I'd like to see more of that. I don't think there's enough of capturing anomalies in whatever we can, spiritual energy, with cameras. I think we need to start really getting into that with the technology we have with IR and, of course, ultra.
Yeah, we're running technology problems. The new technology, the digital technology, it's like, for instance, in video loop, it's really hard to get a good video loop. There's there's a group up in Seattle that's doing a pretty good job. And when I get back to working on this, I'll be contacting them to ask them how. And each piece of hardware, camera and television or monitor combination behaves differently. We found the difference between using a S video or the RCA plugs on the video. Anyway, but the difference between those two connections, between an analog video camera and an analog television set, one we could get a good loop with, the other one we couldn't. So that's part of the problem is finding the right technology.
Yeah, I'd like to know in the future when you've been getting some results and everything, you feel comfortable. I'd like to talk about that in the future,
sure.
What you've come up with. But we've only got a couple minutes here, so I want to make sure that I did get to this. You had mentioned this briefly before. You're doing the Sidereal Time EVP study that you're currently working on.
Yeah.
And you're looking for participants. Where can people go to take a look at that?
If they just go to atransc.org, on the front there's a button they'll take you to the page on it. And also a lot of the theories that we were talking about, a lot of concepts and everything, the etheric.studies.org, one word, etheric studies, is basically my personal website. And what I try to do is segregate a little bit some of my wild-eyed theories from the TransC, so that there's a little bit of deniability if I get so far out that it hurts the association. I try to separate them.
Sure, I understand that. And what I'll do for you, Tom, is I'm going to put all these links on the podcast page, after the podcast, so that listeners can go to, Spirit Talk and Planet Paranormal, and they can click on those links so they can check out some of your pages. Also, everybody listening, you do want to pick up his book, Your Immortal Self. It's available in soft copy, I guess, hard copy, and you can get it also on Kindle, download digital, which is what I did. And I do recommend the Kindle. The reason being is that Tom has painstakingly taken the time and put in links in there for the chapters that you, if you want to move ahead, and as well as the terminology while you're reading, you can click on that link if you're not familiar with that term or what he's discussing, and he'll go into greater detail. So I can't even imagine how much time that took.
Yeah, I found, because I only coined one word, and that was hyperlucidity. Everything else is it's either not normally used that way or something like that, but because it is so terminology intensive, I have a pretty comprehensive glossary both there and on my ethericstudies.org.
That's fantastic. I'm looking at all these notes that I just took from talking to you all over. And one of the reasons is, Tom, I've stated I have this responsibility. We all do. And this project that's coming up in Europe for this new show is I'm with like-minded people, one from France and one from the UK. And we've been talking on video Skype and everything before with our knowledge and our experience. And the one thing is we want a common model. We want to take what's already been learned, but then build a foundation and then go further with what we know so that we can contribute to the paranormal field. And the only way to do that is to look at what's already been established, obviously in ITC, which was one of the reasons why I went and looked at your book, was to arm myself with the proper terms, because I've had the utmost respect for you, for Lisa, as well as everybody that you have rubbed elbows with. And I have one more question. Is Marcello Bacci still alive?
He's still alive, but he's
retired.
Basically retired. He's in his 90s. I guess he's 90 now.
Holy cow!
and he's having a few health issues, so he's not recording anymore.
Is there anybody that is continuing his research, though?
Well, there's a lot of people that have tried to replicate his work and also Annabella Cardoso's
I know
work.
Annabella, yeah.
And in reality, other than just little bits and pieces here and there, we think that the better model for them is physical mediumship rather than, the average person can hope to maybe record a few voices and stuff like that. But we have our super athletes, if you will. And, just like our physical mediums who are able to produce ectoplasm and really sound phenomena. And then somebody like, we ran a circle here for 5 or 6 years and no notable results. And so, not everybody is going to be able to reproduce bocce.
I know, he's
doesn't
incredible.
mean they shouldn't try, but it's
incredible.
it's still one of these kind of things that we each have our own kind of gift. We ought to go pursue it.
Absolutely. Well, Tom, thank you very much. I really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us on Spirit Talk.
I enjoyed it.
Thank you. And please say hi to everybody else for me. For everybody listening, you can check the links on the Spirit Talk and pick up Tom's book, Your Immortal Self. This is Chris Fleming and Tom Butler, and you've been listening to this month's edition of Spirit Talk. I'll see you next month.